My name is Jamie. Hopefully you can see my husband, Sam Schindler, who is also in the room, and we do this presentation together. I am thrilled that you are all here. I'm seeing people still coming in, which is great. This is called Know Thy Neighbor. What should Christians know about Jews and Judaism in a time of Christian nationalism? Now it's not letting me. There we go. I am Jamie. A note about recording before we look at my face. We are recording this. We have done this presentation in a variety of settings. It can get vulnerable. I think Paul and maybe Reverend Carrie Call and I will sort of make a decision at the end. If we think this should be posted or if things need to be edited out. So I don't want the fact that we're recording to cause anyone to hold back. We'd really love to have this become a conversation once we get through some of these slides, but please do know we are currently recording. Okay, me, who am I? So I'm Jamie. I grew up in a secular Jewish home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I view Judaism as important to my culture and heritage, but I'm not a religious person. That said, I have worked in several professional Jewish settings, as well as Lancaster Theological Seminary, which I normally have to clarify is a progressive Christian seminary, loosely affiliated with the UCC, but I think everyone here probably knows that. I do like to point out that I think I am the only person who has worked at both the Jewish Seminary of America and Lancaster Theological, but who knows? I could be wrong. I have written about raising Jewish kids in Lancaster County for several local and national publications, including the Washington Post. And that is the lens that I bring to this talk. I'm not a historian, I'm not a scholar. I am a mom, I'm a writer, and I'm a lifelong learner. So that's who I am.
Hoping everyone can hear me. Jamie is my wife of 20 plus years. I come to this from the lens of someone who lives with Jamie and also her children. So I have a similar experience, sometimes a little different. It says here that I have degrees from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. One is in Jewish history. So I do come with a little bit of credibility in terms of my knowledge of Jewish history and how it relates to the topic that we're going to discuss. There will be a little bit of that momentarily. I am aware that there are people with divinity degrees and pastors in the room. So I'm a little nervous because I don't want to step wrong in terms of my Christian history. I am fascinated by it. I have done a lot of studying. I have my, came prepared. I have my Geza Vermes Religion of Jesus the Jew with me, just in case I need to look something up. This is really just a prop to prove to you that I'm legit. Yeah, so that's me, and you'll hear more from me momentarily.
So this is our thesis for this talk. This is a talk, like I said, we typically give this talk in progressive Christian congregations that want to be better allies. And so our thesis for the evening is that white, which is in parentheses, and we can talk about that later, Christian nationalism is dangerous to Americans, including Jews, Muslims, non-white people, LGBTQIA plus families, democracy itself, and in fact, Christians. Further, Christian hegemony, or can you pronounce it right? I don't actually pronounce it. Hegemony? No? Okay. Christian hegemony. That's
Hegemony.
Hegemony. Hegemony. Like Kathy Najimy, right? Christian
Nope.
hegemony leads to and supports Christian nationalism, which in turn leads to anti-Semitism and a lot of other bigotry and discrimination. We also feel that Christians resisting Christian nationalism is the only thing powerful enough to stop it. So that is the thesis for this talk. What we don't do in this talk is debate the validity or finer points of Christian nationalism. That's not what this talk is about. When we are invited into progressive Christian spaces, we're invited because the people involved want to be better allies and more inclusive. Now, Monday night, for the first time, we had two Christian nationalists in the audience. and this was in person in Elizabethtown. For any of you who follow the news, even the national news, Don Lamb was in the audience on Monday night. He is the pastor at Lifegate Church. His church sent 6 buses to the January 6th riots. So that was a new experience for us. We don't think that's what tonight is going to be like, but we don't know. I don't know all of you. I do know some of you, and I like you very much. So there is that. To
You
dig a little,
handled him well.
I tried. I tried my best. Thank you. So just so we're all clear on definitions, Christian nationalism, as we talk about it in this talk, is an ideology that is based around the idea that this is a Christian nation, that this was founded as a Christian nation, and therefore it should be a Christian nation today and should be so in the future. According to survey data, Christian nationalists agree with statements like the federal government should declare the United States of America a Christian nation. Our laws should be based on Christian values. Being a Christian is important if you want to be a real American. So I don't know how many of you, again, I'll probably mispronounce this, Brad Onishi, did identify as a Christian nationalist, does not anymore. And so we use his definition. And then further, Christian hegemony describes the ways in which a dominant group, in this case mainly Christians, disseminate their dominant social constructions as common sense, normative, or even universal, even though most of the world's inhabitants are not Christian. So for central Pennsylvania, I don't know the stats myself, maybe some of you do. I would say that Christian is the dominant religion of those who practice religions in the area. But I always like to remember that dominance or majority doesn't equal normal. I like to think that we all, so much as we want to identify as normal, can be normal, and that majority doesn't necessarily have the stranglehold on cultural norms. Unfortunately, Christian hegemony and specifically Lancaster, there is quite a bit of a stranglehold. And one of the reasons we do this is because, pulling up my notes over here. One of the reasons we do this is because I have been in many progressive Christian spaces that identify as welcoming, affirming, open and affirming, where there is still a heavy nod towards Christian hegemony, and that upholds Christian nationalism, which many of the Christians in those spaces would very much like to distance themselves from. So really, what we're going to talk about tonight are things, the talk is based around things that have been said to us and our kids, often by people who consider themselves allies, and often said from a good heart and a well-meaning intention, but actually further that hegemony, which therefore furthers the Christian nationalism, which is dangerous. So I'm sure you've all heard, when you know better, you do better, or when you know better, you can do better. Often when we give these talks, someone will come up to me and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I said all of those things. I have said all of those things. I've never thought about it that way. And that's fine. That's fine. If for many people, our family might be the first Jewish family they've ever met. They've never thought through a lens that involves people who are not Christian. All I would ask is that if that is the case for you, and you thought, well, I say that all the time, I thought that was fine, I would just ask you to re-examine that assumption and have a dialogue with us about it. So I don't know if I can see any head nods. Are we all so far on the same page? Everyone, we're good? Okay, I saw some thumbs up. Hi, Katie. I can see you now. Hi. Hi. All right, great. Okay. Fantastic. So this entire talk has grown out of things people have said to us or our kids, often when they think they are being supportive or an ally. And I'm going to let Sam take this. There is an asterisk here. These slides do not contain direct quotes, but represent the kinds of things we've heard. In some cases, they do represent direct quotes, but I'm not going to call anybody out. So Sam, you want to take this slide?
Sure. I'll just note a problem first, which is normally when you do this, we can hear the laughter. That was like a Borscht Belt shtick that Jamie and I do. We are sans laughter tonight. So that's going to hamper my ability to really ham it up because I'm a stage person. So I apologize for that in advance. I can't be anti-Semitic because I follow Christ and Christ was a Jew. Again, I know a lot of you out there have had experience with a lot of these things, especially the history component of this. So feel free to correct me politely if I get anything woefully wrong, or if you want to add anything to any of these specific pieces of the historical component of tonight's talk. Why is this a problem? This is a problem because there is a fundamental difference, of course, between the Jew that Jesus was and the Jews that exist now in the 21st century, and in large part the Christians that you probably are, or may be. So what does that mean? Actually, I'm learning from Vermes a lot about what it meant for Jesus to be a Torah observant Jew, whether you agree with Vermes's perspective on this or not. He wrote this in 1993. He was pretty convinced that there was enough of a Jewish context for Jesus to place him in that world pretty squarely. Whether or not the evangelists were quoting specifically what Jesus said in a Jewish context or whether it was redacted later. But the important point for us tonight is that Jesus was Torah observant, and his early followers were equally, I'm not going to say equally, I'm going to say we're of the same ilk, Torah observant Jews. There's a lot that Jesus says in what we know of as the New Testament, which is another important term that I'm going to unpack for us in a moment, which could be construed as, for me, definitely does construe it as, coming from a decidedly Jewish context. That context being the intertestamental period in which we have the rise of rabbinic literature, what we know of as the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Chilta, and a number of other rabbinic literatures out there. And we could place what Jesus says about the law in that context, and we could say that he's sort of in dialogue with those things. The important thing to recognize here, above all, I suppose, is that whether or not wherever you place the provenance of the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, wherever you place them, the evangelists actually wrote them. The life of Jesus came before, certainly 40 or 50 years, the first of those Gospels being written. So what's important about that is that's a period of time in which the Second Temple in Jerusalem was still standing. Why is that important? That's important because much of the law, or the Torah, we'll talk about those terms in a second, much of the law was dependent upon the temple cult. The word cult, of course, for Jamie, in this case, means just a collection of religious rites and rituals, not the things you love to investigate.
That was a nod towards my true crime and cult fascination.
Well, you
So
want to be in one so that you can investigate it and then write a tell-all. I know. Anyway, so the Jewish law was associated, the Torah law was associated in large part, not completely, but associated, of course, in large part with the temple. Once the temple gets destroyed, what do you do with that? The entirety, not the entirety, but a good component of Jewish law sort of goes out the window, so to speak, to use an unfortunate turn of phrase. So the Judaism that evolves after the destruction of the temple, largely rabbinic, begins to depart greatly from the Judaism that a Torah observant person in the early first century would have been associated with and would have been following themselves. So all of this to say, rather long-windedly, if you follow Christ, you are following someone who would have been following a Jewish law that is very different from the Jewish law that Jews follow today, if they follow any law at all. So that's the first key element there. And just the quick note right there, she has this note, does this mean you can attend a Shabbat service at a synagogue next weekend and learn more about Jesus and what shaped him? That is to say, could you understand from going into a synagogue service on Shabbat next weekend exactly what a synagogue service would have looked like in the first century CE? And the answer is, of course, resoundingly no, because if you ask me, a minimalist historian who studied with a lot of minimalists at the theological seminary, synagogues didn't exist in the first century, certainly not as we know them. So that would look very different since we didn't actually have synagogues until maybe the 3rd or 4th century CE. So that's one sort of demonstration of how these two things are very, very different from one another. Key terminology here that I mentioned before that I'm going to elaborate upon right now, next slide, is this thing which you may have heard, may have said. It's okay if you did, certainly okay if you've been in a context where you're nodded along when someone said this. We share the Old Testament. You may be familiar with the idea that the terminology here does not immediately line up. Old Testament does not equal Hebrew Bible. Old Testament, in its terminology, assumes the imminent existence of a New Testament, that intertestamental period that I was talking about. That's when the concept, or when the New Testament becomes prominent, that's when the concept of an Old Testament begins to become much more familiar to people. Previously, it was just the Torah or the Tanakh. Tanakh is an acronym, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, stands for Torah, which is, you know, the 5 books of Moses, Nevi'im, which are the major prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, and then Ketuvim, which are the writings like Chronicles and other Psalms and things like that. That is the corpus of material that makes up what we know of as the Tanakh, or for better or worse, what we'll call the Hebrew Bible. That does not equal the Old Testament. And one reason we know this is because the church's Old Testament canon, first of all, it has different books in it and has a different chronology in it. And it ends in a very different place where the Hebrew Bible ends. The Old Testament, such as it is in the church canon, ends with Malachi, predicting the return of Elijah. And you know why it does, because these are all harbingers of John the Baptist and of the arrival of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Of course, from a Hebrew biblical perspective, these things were completely unknown to the writers of the Hebrew Bible, and so they never would have placed them there in that context with that imminent arrival of those important characters in mind. Instead, the final book of the Hebrew Bible is the book of Second Chronicles, which concludes in a really, really important place, historically speaking, because it's actually historical record, whereas I'm sure you know, most of the Hebrew Bible is not historical record at all. Some of it is. This is in that it is recording or giving us a story, the historical record of King Cyrus of Persia and his edict that allows the Jews who were exiled in Babylon back in 587 to return to their homeland of Judea. I'm smiling here because these terms are really, really hot button these days. Let's call it Israel for now. Let's them return to Israel of their own volition. Some 50 years after, of course, the initial exile as perpetrated by the Babylonians. Of course, the Persians defeat the Babylonians, which enables this to happen. It may be important to note for later on, or for just your general edification, that a good number of the Jews who settled in Babylon had it pretty good and did not choose to return. In fact, 3/4 of them stayed in Babylon, and those Jews, many of them, remained in what we know of as the Near East, and might well have been Jews who were living in Iraq in the early 20th century with the arrival of Zionism and a great deal of tension which bubbled up from there. I'm way off base, Jamie, here because I'm talking about 20th century Zionism. That's coming next. But anyway, those are two very important key differentiations to make that are that undergird this idea that when you say things like I follow Christ and Christ was a Jew and we share the Old Testament, please be aware, you probably already are, please be aware of the key differentiations, discrepancies between these two terms and what they actually mean in practice.
I want to take a moment here. I want to remind everyone that generally this presentation is for lay people, for congregants. So as you're listening to us talk, know that this is sort of what we lay out as the history part of the talk. We are motoring along because, as Sam said, we don't have the typical interplay and the laughs and the guffaws. Does anyone have any questions about how either I have framed Christian nationalism and the talk itself, or the way Sam has framed the history as we will be
I'm
using?
hiding behind my Burmese just in case of volleys.
If anyone does, please feel free to come off mute or raise your hand. It's really hard talking at people. That's not our normal.
You do it here in the house all the time.
People talk back in the house. Okay, we can keep going. I just wanted to take a breather. Um, so the next slide is mine. I've heard this several times. We are the same because we share Judeo-Christian values. You hear Judeo-Christian values a lot in the news and more in our government. I would posit there is no such thing, and that while Jews and Christians can share many beliefs, I can't think of a single one. Now, I'm not a historian or a scholar or a pastor or a rabbi, but as I was raised, I cannot think of a single value that Jews and Christians share that are exclusive to those two groups. So to me, when I hear someone invoking Judeo-Christian values, what I hear is specifically an exclusion of Muslim people. They're not saying the Abrahamic values, right? They're saying Judeo-Christian values. And they're excluding a lot of other religions, people who don't practice religion that may share lots of those same values too. So for me, this has always been a moment where I stop, I reset, I might ask someone, what do they mean? Certainly when I hear it coming in the media or currently in the government, I'm quite sure that the exclusion is likely intentional
Is guilt a value?
across the board. Across the board. Everyone I've ever met.
We have that
Actually,
one down.
frequently people say to me, "Oh, we're the same because of the guilt." I'm like, well, "Sure, but so is everybody else." Um, all right, back to you with the hot button issue.
Oh, um, great. This is the easiest slide of the night. I'm just going to sit back and relax because it speaks for itself, and there's no explanation needed. I can't be anti-Semitic. I support Israel. So we did not go into further depth with this one on Monday. I think probably intelligently so. We haven't really delved into this one so much, although it's something both of us think and talk about quite a bit. Let's start small. Not all Jews are Zionists. Not all Zionists are Jews. That's pretty important. There is a huge movement of Christian Zionists, which is actually dangerous to Jews. I'll get historical here for just a second to put that into some context. If there are questions about this specific one, I do have a thing that I could add later on, but it's important to understand that the earliest notions of Zionism were supported by the British in the early 20th century, not because they thought that Jews deserved their own homeland because of the years of persecution that they had endured, but because, one, they wanted Jews out of Europe. That's the anti-Semitic part, I suppose. And also, they believed in a kind of millenarian Zionism, wherein, going back many centuries, this concept that, like, were Jews to be in control of the Holy Land, that would hasten the arrival of the Messiah, that is to say, the second coming of the Christ. And so British Christians were super into Zionism, and this actually worked in tandem with their hyper-racism against the indigenous Palestinians. So Christian Zionism really worked for the British, and it works for some folks in the government that we currently are all living under right now. I will not go into details there necessarily for the moment. So important to understand, of course, that Zionism is a multifaceted thing. It begins as such. It has become much more streamlined and therefore woefully misunderstood in terms of, or it's kind of been separated from its historicity, which is really, really important to understand. There were Jews and non-Jews in the early stages of Zionism who did not believe that Jews should actually return to a homeland in Palestine at all, in fact. And so Zionism, the point I'm trying to make, of course, is that Zionism takes on a lot of different faces and descriptions and styles. And so you can't just rubber stamp Zionism and say that if you're not a Zionist, you're therefore somehow anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. There are Jews out there who don't feel any connection to Israel at all. And American Jews are not a monolith on Israel or any other issue. And we're speaking from our experiences because I will just tell you to wrap this segment up, unless there are questions, that I grew up in an environment in which both my family and the people that I was surrounded with in my early formative years, both with my synagogue, my school, and the summer camp that I went to, were very invested in indoctrinating me, investing in me with a strong support of Israel, a strong Zionist approach to everything. And so that's how I grew up. And that painted the way that colored the way that I understood the world in terms of Israel and the Middle East. It also encouraged me, and I did go visit Israel several times. I lived there for a while. And this colored my perspective on this. And if you want me to talk a little bit later about how those things changed over time, I can. Just do understand that at the very beginning of my life, I was someone who was very invested in this, the concept of Zionism, being a Jew, and I'm much, much more separated from that now. So there are degrees of which we should be aware at the very least.
And conversely, I was raised in a secular Jewish household, and I was told, you are an American first, you are a Jew second, this country is safe for you. So I was raised with the expectation that many Jewish families will say, well, because of the Holocaust, we need a Jewish state. That is not how I was raised at all, nor is it how I feel now. Any questions before we move on from here? Okay.
Well, either we've bored them to sleep or offended them, or they're just completely 100% in agreement with everything we've said. Those are the three options.
I don't know. Okay, so again, I'm going to talk about my time at Lancaster Theological Seminary, which was a lovely time in my life. But I will share that at least once a year, and for those of you who have been to the seminary, studied at the seminary, I had a lovely dark office in the basement, and it had a really nice, comfy brown chair. And at least once a year, there was a student in that brown chair, really emotional, apologizing to me for what their faith tradition, home congregation, childhood taught them about Judaism and Jews. And the first time it happened, it really shook me. I had the conversation as best I could. And then, lucky me, my office was right next to Greg Carey's office. And I ran into Greg Carey's office and said, what were people told about Jews when they were a kid? Like, what do I need to know? Right. So I was having this conversation where he explained to me, oh, that's a student who's just come out of Julia O'Brien's Hebrew Bible class. Everything they were taught as a child is being appended. And, so then I was prepared for it. Right. So when it happened again. So again, think about this presentation as something that maybe you would have us come and do for your congregation, right? And so you all may know a lot about the Hebrew Bible and a lot about modern Judaism. I have no idea. I know what some of the students who were there when I was there studied, but I think a lot of congregants, lay people that we meet in this area have some preconceived notions about Jews, and or have never met or talked to deeply a Jewish person. So this question comes up a lot. Oh, thank you, David. I just want to show, can you see the chat when I pull it up on here? Or can I only see it? Can you see the chat right now on my screen? Sam? No. Okay, so I can see the chat on my screen. Okay, so thank you. David Harris shared that this is the first time I've ever heard a workshop like this, so I'm just listening and absorbing and will process later. So I think that's speaking to the silence that Sam was questioning. So thank you, David, for sharing that. That's helpful. So, what makes someone a Jew? We talk about this in this presentation, number one, because the first time we did this presentation together, this became a huge sticking point for someone in the audience, and it took a lot of time. And I thought, oh, maybe we're assuming people know things they don't know. And also because the more everyone knows about people who are not like them, which I put in quotes because honestly, humanity is humanity, I think the better we can support each other. So I'm going to go a little bit into what makes someone a Jew. So Judaism is a religion, but it is also a cultural heritage. Different people, different organizations, different governmental entities, and different Jewish denominations define Judaism differently. And this has become very complicated for some of the people that we've spoken to, because if you're looking at Judaism through the lens of Christianity as a religion, it's not going to match up, right? It's not analogous. Like, oh, you are Jewish and I am Christian, therefore these things are true about each other. That's not how Jews necessarily experience Judaism. Sometimes I ask this question of Sam and I always forget the answer. Does the government of Israel consider me Jewish?
Yes.
Do they consider our kids Jewish?
Yes, but the problem is you and I were not married in an Orthodox ceremony.
That's
And
what I was
so
getting at.
there is like their grandparents are Jewish, therefore they're Jewish. But the fact that you and I did not have an Orthodox marriage ceremony is deeply problematic for other legalistic reasons.
Right. Right. So when we were interviewing rabbis to marry us, because we did not have a home congregation at the time we were married, one of the rabbis would not do the ceremony unless it was Orthodox. And his reasoning was, I need to ensure that your children are Jewish by the definitions of the state of Israel, or I can't be a part of the ceremony. So we said, no, thank you. Also because he wanted the wedding to be kosher and I did not want the wedding to be kosher. So that was a sticking point for him. Childhood best friend of Sam's, right? Is that, yeah,
I was at his house every Saturday afternoon after synagogue.
yeah. He didn't do the
He would
ceremony.
not like me very much now.
No. Yeah, you'd be surprised. I've had some conversations with him. So what makes someone a Jew? Jews do not have a unifying credo. You do not have to believe in God to be a Jew. And there are very few things that all Jews and all denominations have in common. And when I started doing some research for this talk, because like I said, I was raised in a secular household around a lot of Jews, I could walk to both sets of grandparents' houses from the house that I grew up in. So lots of Jews in my life, lots of family time, lots of cultural experiences, but not raised in a synagogue or a congregation. And when I was researching for this, I thought, well, wait a minute, like, what does make someone a Jew? Like if everything that makes me a Jew is a negative, right? We don't have a unifying credo. We don't have to believe in God, then what actually is it? So I went to the Pew Research Center, which defines a Jew as, on the one hand, being Jewish as a matter of religion. The traditional matrilineal definition of Jewish identity is founded on halakha, Jewish religious law. And on the other hand, being Jewish also may be a matter of ancestry, ethnicity, and cultural background. What this leaves off is choice. So this definition didn't actually work so well for me, although it's probably a definition that many people would point to. So I came up with my own definition. So a Jewish someone is someone who self-identifies as a Jew because of accident of birth or choice and practice within a community of Jews who does not believe Jesus Christ was the Messiah. So then, of course, we get to the question of Messianic Jews or Jews for Jesus, right? So if I'm saying you get to define Judaism for yourself, then why am I saying that Jews don't believe Jesus Christ is the Messiah? That is actually, we don't have a unifying credo, but we have a central tenet, which is Jesus Christ was not the Messiah, and Jews for Jesus are actually Christians. A lot of people are confused by that, and I always point to the United States government. I know I can't see all of you, but were any of you military chaplains? Anyone a military chaplain or know a military chaplain? So in the military, chaplains wear a lapel pin that designates what religion they are. They can chaplain to anybody, but they have to wear a pin. And the United States government says that Jews for Jesus wear a cross. So not only do I believe this to be true, not only do most all Jews believe this to be true, but the US government also believes this to be true. So the only things that I think every Jew I've ever come into contact with would agree on is Jesus Christ was not the Messiah and Jews for Jesus are not Jews. So it does feel a little weird that the only sort of things we agree on are negatives, right? Nots, but that is the people that we are. Um, I like to stop here and talk about how important compromise is in marriage. Sam Schindler is an actual graphic designer. He let me make this very ugly slide because I wanted to.
Are you,
So
I'm sorry, are you still sharing your slides? Because I don't see it. Maybe I screwed something up
can
personally.
everybody see my slide? Can other people? Other people can see my slide.
Okay.
Do you?
I'm the one who's off. I'll figure it out.
Okay, but this is the slide we need to talk about. So we talk about how ugly this slide is, but it is functional. And Sam, just so you know, this morning I reversed Reform and Orthodox so that it makes more sense now, if you can't see it. You're muted now.
I see that you have changed it,
So now you can see my slides.
but you have also done away with a joke,
Hmm.
which I don't know. What's
Hmm.
the
Yeah, what's the cost benefit of actually
cost
having a
benefit of
slide
that?
that makes sense? I don't know.
Okay, so let's take a look at this slide, which is beautiful. It really is beautiful because you, Jamie, are beautiful and everything you do is beautiful. Uh, Denominations. So you are all well aware, probably well aware, or I'm going to assume that you're all well aware that there are numerous denominations within Christianity, not least, of course, the major divide between Catholicism and Protestantism. Of course, there's the schism in about 1000, where you get Eastern and Western. And then, of course, in the 16th century, everything, I almost said goes to hell. Everything just kind of like goes off the map with a bunch of different denominations. In Judaism, there are denominations as well. We've tried to keep things a little bit, a little bit more compact. This, someone would look at, another person might look at this slide and say, that's wrong because it doesn't include X, Y, or Z. And that would be totally acceptable. I'm going to limit our conversation here right now to the 4 denominations that are on this very beautiful slide. I don't love green. So first, we'll start with Orthodoxy, which is all the way over on the right, which I guess politically makes more sense. And you have here this kind of like this minder, this guide, which says more strict and less strict. That, of course, should be flipped too, because, yeah, you may have missed that bit. Because Orthodoxy is considered observance level-wise more strict versus the things on the left side of the spectrum, which we considered less strict. But it's okay because it gives me a chance to explain this a little bit more in depth. Oh, no, you're going to change it right now. Up until, I would say, the mid or early 19th century, with maybe a few little bobs and blips in the 17th or 18th century, there's no orthodoxy because everybody's Orthodox, right? There is no pushback. There is no move away from what is, I guess, I don't know, these are all fraught terms, but what one would consider to be normative Judaism, for lack of a better way of putting it. Judaism, which have, of course, evolved tremendously over the course of the previous 24, 25 centuries, because, of course, as we mentioned earlier, the temple gets destroyed, so that changes things. And, of course, as Jews migrate around the world, you're shaking your head. Are you okay over there?
Yeah, my slide's getting even uglier as we speak. It's fine. Keep
Well,
going. Yeah.
okay. We're not going to worry about that. So even as Jews migrate around the world, observances kind of shift and move based on who they're living with. For example, if you're a Jew living in the Mashriq or the Maghreb, which are decidedly Muslim empires in the Middle Ages, you would do things that would be very different from if you lived in, let's say, Mainz in the Middle Ages in what's now Germany. So orthodoxy isn't really a thing until we get pushback against orthodoxy, and we get pushback against orthodoxy in the 19th century. I'm going to make a statement here which some modern Jewish historians would disagree with. So take that with a grain of salt. But I'm going to state, for simplicity's sake, that it is the Haskalah, which is the Jewish Enlightenment in Europe, and largely in Western Europe. The Eastern Haskalah takes place about a century later in Russia, because, of course, you didn't have Poland between 1793 and 1917. So it's all Russia. But in the Western Haskalah, the Western Jewish Enlightenment, you have what an enlightenment is, where people begin to think more independently about some of the previous religious norms that they lived with, and they begin to push back against them. What it ultimately turns into in Germany, and I'll stick with Germany for a reason for the moment, what it ultimately turns into in Germany in the early 19th century, 1819 or thereabouts, is a move to for Jews to become more readily assimilated into regular secular or Christian German society. This, of course, is, I am maintaining, a step along the spectrum from enlightenment to assimilation, and in some cases conversion. One of the most important, probably the most important Jewish Enlightenment thinker was a guy named Moses Mendelssohn, whose grandson you probably know as a composer of classical music, who was, of course, a Christian, because Mendelssohn's Enlightenment program was so good that his progeny converted to Christianity. That was a joke. And I guess if you were a rabbi or a Jewish teacher, you would laugh bitterly, because, of course, conversion to Christianity is the worst possible thing. But the German Jews in the 19th century begin to change the way they dress. They begin to change the way they look. They begin to change the way they talk. They move away from Yiddish and they move towards German. They change the way they worship, because now in their synagogues they are beginning to look more like churches, because they would like to be more German and less standy-outy, so to speak. There is, of course, a move towards emancipation in Europe and France. This takes place in the late 18th century. So there is kind of like, there are stakes that Jews are attempting to maintain, because once they have gained their citizenship as being members of France, as being members of what will become Germany, as being members of England, they don't want to lose it. And so they don't want to stand out. And they certainly don't want to be seen as a nation within a nation. That is to say, with allegiance towards a place like Israel, such as it was in the imagination of people in the 18th century. There is a reform movement. This is the reform movement that we are beginning to see emerge. Reformed churches you have, but you have the reform movement in Judaism. This begins to emerge as well in the middle and late 19th century here in the United States. And it serves as a corrective, in a way, as a move away from orthodoxy, as a move away from old world Judaism, the Jews who look like, well, maybe they look like the Amish, which you might be familiar with. Insert joke here about the movie Witness with Harrison Ford. Jamie, you can make that joke later on if you want to. And so away from that kind of old world look and more like the new world look. And also, as we go, we are letting go of some of our observances. And observance is a key word here, because we're not talking about, it's important to differentiate between observance and religiousness. We're not talking about getting rid of our religiosity. We're talking about getting rid of or moving away from some of the stricter observances, dietary laws, Sabbath laws, and even laws related to certain ceremonies, like a birth ceremony or a marriage ceremony, moving away from the really strict and kind of old world ways of doing those things. So you get these two poles at this time, like a right and a left, a strict and a not so strict, to put it simply. And then, of course, you have the conservative movement, which comes along in the middle to late 19th century, which says, Reform Jews have given away too much. We would like to recapture some of what the Orthodox Jews, now that we're calling them Orthodox Jews, maintain, because we feel like we're giving away too much and we're becoming too much like secular people. And so the conservative movement wishes to be positivistic and maintain and reinvigorate some of the rituals that Jews were kind of letting go of in the 19th century. I grew up a conservative Jew. This does not mean conservative in the modern political or economic sense. It means, well, I'll tell you what it means for me, which it means that I grew up in a very, very, very large synagogue, 2,000 families in the suburbs of New York, in Westchester County, not Westchester, but it's the one word Westchester, outside New York in the 1980s. And so our synagogue was, in a lot of ways, like the Democratic Party, a very, very large, wishing to be all encompassing, wholly and completely failed experiment in being inclusive, just like the Democratic Party. Because what you get is a very big tent where nobody agrees on anything, everybody hates each other. You're not observant enough. You're too observant. We're going to split off and do our own thing. We don't like, for example, in the early 1990s, Jamie, just give me a signal if I'm going on too long with this. We don't like, for example, in the 1990s, that the synagogue was considering going egalitarian. That is to say, allowing for women to be on the dais or the bima and do such important things as lead prayers and read from the Torah, and also ordain and bring in female rabbis. This was the thing that the synagogue was moving towards because the political atmosphere was such that it kind of like had to. But there was a large contingent of families who were like, no, we're going to go to the Orthodox synagogue down the road because we don't like this move towards progressivism. And I have to admit that at age 14 or 15, I was one of those people. I know it's a shanda, Jamie. It's a shanda. Why was I
We've
one of those
never
people?
we've
I
never
know.
talked about that.
It's a shameful, shameful part of my past. But why was I one of those people who was resistant to change? You
You
know
were
why,
indoctrinated.
Jamie.
You were
Yes.
indoctrinated.
So who is the person who was really on the forefront of telling me how to believe and what to believe and how to advocate for those beliefs?
Sam is now baiting me to make fun of his Jewish mother. And I
In
mean,
this case, I'm talking about Shirley. I'm talking about my grandmother,
oh, oh
who was
gosh.
very traditional in this regard. My mother followed in her footsteps. But yeah, so shamefully, and I'm embarrassed to admit that I was trying to push back against this move towards progressivism. So in that way, I was on the conservative side of things, so to speak, small c. There were a number of ways in which I was on the complete other side of the spectrum, that is to say, not observant enough. When I went to school, I went to an Orthodox day school. There were conservative Jews who went there, but they saw me as someone who didn't do enough Jewish stuff, who didn't celebrate holidays strictly enough, who wasn't enough of an observant Sabbath, a Sabbath observer, because one of the things that we did on Sabbath, which nobody else did, was we drove a car. The reason we drove a car was we made the woeful, tragic mistake of buying a house. Well, I didn't, my parents did, of buying a house in 1972, which was 3 whole miles away from the synagogue that we attended, which meant that we couldn't really walk there. We had little kids when we were little. So we drove to the synagogue. That was a big no-no. And I was ridiculed publicly for doing so many a time. My mother made sure to tell me that it was okay because we only drove to the synagogue and back. We didn't drive anywhere else. And Jamie will not hesitate to remind me that the synagogue parking lot was, of course, off limits. It was closed on Shabbat, on Saturday. So what would we do? We parked next door in the Toys R Us parking lot for all the heathens. And a big sign that said, heathens park here. So we knew where to go. So we were the conservative Jews. There is one more denomination to make note of, and that's Reconstructionist Jews, who, if I'd known about them when I was a kid, I would have been probably interested beyond my anti-feminist days. So Reconstructionist Jews are those who are interested in maintaining some of the basic tenets of heritage and tradition, like maintaining a synagogue service that's in Hebrew and reading all the prayers as opposed to skimming the prayers down, but doing so in an environment where they don't judge your observance. So you can be any observance level, but the heritage level is much higher. That is to say, the traditions that were largely kept by the Orthodox or conservative or ones that the Reform movement moved away from, or ones that the Reconstructionist Jews are trying to bring back. So I'll end my lecture.
Great. Thank you. You didn't mention post-denominational, which is on the slide, and we often say that Sam and I are post-denominational Jews, which is to say there is now a movement of mostly younger Jews, though not exclusively, and we are not young anymore, who have said none of these things speak to me, therefore I'm just going to do my own thing. So I've always considered myself a secular Jew. I now consider myself also a post-denominational Jew. Marion, would you like to come off mute?
So help me understand what that means, post-denominational. I'm I am not familiar with that at all. So
So
can you
I
help
think
me?
in some ways there actually is an analogy to Christianity in that you have people who are not part of any of the mainstream denominations. They'll say I'm a Christ follower or like what is like Lancaster LCBC, Lancaster County Bible Church, LCBC. So there's this idea that um, we exist in our religion, such that it is a religion, outside of any of these movements. So if you ask me, lots of people in my past will say, oh, are you a Reform Jew? Because they see how I dress or they see my
Oh,
politics. And I say, no, I don't, I'm not a Reform Jew. I didn't grow up in a Reformed congregation. I'm not affiliated. So it's like saying unaffiliated. I don't know if that's a term in Christianity that makes sense, but it's something that exists outside this structure that has been in place for a
okay.
very long time.
We're also post-denominational because no synagogue in Lancaster would have us.
That is true. We've been kicked out of a synagogue. That is true.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah.
I'm saying it in an ironic sort of funny. I'm amused by it because, you have to sort of like laugh about these things.
Yeah. So, Marion, did that answer your
It
question?
did.
Okay.
It
Okay.
helped because
Great.
this train of thought, flow of ideas is new to me too, and I'm just trying to suck it in and try to understand. I'm a chaplain at a um, retirement home community, and the intention is that I work and minister not in a non-denominational way,
Mhm.
and so my language needs to be as receptive to all ideas, all spiritualities or no spiritualities, and it's always a challenge. And so I appreciate. I'm just trying to suck it all in and uh, learn.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. Oftentimes, there are lots of semantics surrounding secular versus non-denominational versus ecumenical, right? Those are all things that I'm guessing you're dealing with on a regular basis. I will caution you, and I will make myself available to you at any point. There is a joke, two Jews, three opinions, right? So if you take something that we've said tonight and you have someone who identifies as Jewish and you are doing chaplaincy work with them, they may say something that is in complete opposition to what we've said. There is likely a reason for that, and it doesn't mean that they're wrong or we're wrong. It does mean that like a lot of things these days, and I'm sure you know this, you deal with the person in front of you, right? Some people use people first language, some people don't. And so I would say one of the parts about being open, inclusive, affirming, whatever word you're using, is letting a person self-identify, right? So we, I mean, the fun part of the talk is all the ways I wasn't religious enough for Sam's family. But we're not going to go into that because it's not as instructive to you. But certainly, I mean, when I was a child, I had a man come up to me and say, "Your name's Jamie. That's not a Jewish name." I mean, I was 10. I didn't know what he was talking about. But so no, I mean, Jamie's certainly not in the Bible, right? But there are tons of Jewish girls my age or Jewish women my age named Jamie. It was very confusing to me. But thank you for that question. That was
Probably why
helpful.
my mother didn't like you to begin with because you had a name that she didn't approve of.
Yeah, well, your sister's name is Jessie, and that is not that far off. So, okay. Any other
Mhm.
questions about Judaism, denominations, levels of observance? Okay. So, why is this all important? It's important to this talk, and it's important to what we try to do, is because there's no mandate to proselytize in Judaism, and in fact, it is discouraged. And side by side with that, Jews do not believe you have to be Jewish to do good in the world or to reach any concept of heaven, which is very complicated for Jews. But all of this is to say, when we're raising Jewish kids in Lancaster, PA, We are not supposed to proselytize. We do not need someone to be Jewish to share values, to share meals, to share community, and to believe that they are doing good work. And yet, we have encountered so many people, due again to Christian hegemony, that proselytizing and evangelizing is very important to some Christians in this area. And they are the dominant culture. So it is, or feels like, it can be constant. So we like to do this talk, especially in congregations where people are trying to wrestle with what does it mean to be an ally? What does it mean to be inclusive? What does it mean to be in community with people who are not like themselves? Is to really understand that if you're doing outreach with a Jewish congregation, you can't be doing it with the intent to convert them, right? Like I mean, I hope this isn't offensive to any of you, but we don't need the good news. It's not, it's like you all are golfers and I play football and you're trying to teach me how to putt and all I need to know is how to kick a field goal. It just doesn't, it doesn't apply. And do you like that? That's a new one, Sam. Do you like that? I'm really proud of that one. It's just not something that I need. Um, So Sherry said, I think the mantra of the United Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ. Right. So I don't know all of the different denominational mandates or mantras. I do know what it feels like to have my 7-year-old tell me that his friend told him he was going to hell because he doesn't believe in Santa. And that is a true story. Happened every December. Usually it was you're going to hell because you don't celebrate Christmas or you're going to hell because you don't believe in God. But once it was you're going to hell because you don't believe in Santa. And that was something that I got to unpack with a 7-year-old. Right. So that is, I don't know if that's a difficult thing for you all to hear. I don't know how often you've thought about that. But I think what's so important to me is the idea that my friends are doing good work and it doesn't matter to me what they believe beyond let's do good work together. So let's get Sherry. Sherry? Yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
I took my face off because I'm eating my dinner, but I think we could all do a lot better if we stopped worrying about getting new members, putting that like really, really high on our list and started more focusing on doing the right thing. If we do the right thing, if we are involved in the right activities, good things will happen. So I think stop focusing so much on attendance and financials and start doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I want to be really cognizant of the fact that you all are also running businesses, right? Like you are. I mean, whether you have a budget, right? You have financials. That is a thing. I would hope that the financials are not more important than my 7-year-old who's being told he's going to hell. Like I would love to see interacting with people who are not of your faith be right up there with balancing the budget. I think that makes us all safer and it makes us a stronger community as a whole. So let's talk about what it's like to be Jewish in central Pennsylvania and some of the things that we have encountered. So we're at 7:30. Paul, this goes till 8, right? And we want to have time for questions. Okay, I'm cognizant of that. So I'll tell you, we moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania in July of 2010. We had a 1-year-old child. Is that right? Yeah, we had a 1-year-old child in 2010. She turned 16 tomorrow. And and part of the service of the movers we hired is that they would put together anything they took apart. So if they had to take apart shelves, they were then responsible for putting it back together. For us, that meant our child's crib. And so at one point during the move, I was called upstairs to the room that was going to be my daughter's room because they wanted to know where we wanted the crib. And I walked in and a man who was wearing, like a cut off t-shirt had a swastika the size of his entire upper arm, shoulder to elbow. I had been in Lancaster 24 hours. And I acknowledge there are people with swastika tattoos all over the country, all over the world. What shocked me was that someone who was performing a job was allowed to have it displayed like that. That was a moment for me. And we probably should have moved that. No, just kidding. But it was startling and shocking and super concerning. I think there was an emotional reaction to the fact that he was building my child's crib and that he knew where we lived. And so, of course, I start doing a mental inventory of what is already unpacked that would transmit that we were Jewish, right? Like that's what's happening in my head. That was my first 24 hours in Lancaster. About 8 months later, Sam went to Europe for 13 days in January. And on the same day, I started a new job, and Nora was diagnosed with walking pneumonia. She was about 18 months at that time. So I was really stressed out. We have no family in the area. It's also unusual for people in Lancaster, I have found, but we had no family in the area. So I strapped my daughter to my chest in one of those baby wearing things because I had to take her with me to Giant to get the prescription filled for her walking pneumonia. And she was a very cute baby and people used to touch her a lot. And I thought, okay, she already has walking pneumonia. I don't need her being exposed to anything else. So I had her on my chest. And as I was checking out, a woman said, "Oh, is that a baby?" And like, no, it's a rat. Yes. And she said, I said, "Oh, yeah, she actually has pneumonia. I'm here just to get the prescription." And the woman laid hands on her and started praying. So that was my second, I wonder what's going on in this place. Couple months after that, or maybe a couple weeks after that, we're at her 18-month-old checkup. Again, it's like February. And I tell the pediatrician, daycare wants to take her pacifier away during nap time. They say 18 months is the cutoff. She sleeps really well at night, but only with the pacifier. Do I need to take the pacifier away from her at night? So put yourself in my mindset, right? I'm a mom. I'm a first-time mom to an 18-month-old child in a place that we have never lived, do not have family. And I'm asking advice in February. And the pediatrician's response was, "Oh, taking the pacifier away is not a big deal. Just tell her the Easter Bunny will bring her a bike if she gives you her pacifier. It will be fine." And I turned to my daughter, who again was only 18 months old, but highly verbal, and said, "Oh, honey, the Easter Bunny's not bringing you anything because you're Jewish." And then I turned and looked at the pediatrician, and he didn't know what to say, and I didn't have anything else to say. And maybe that was not my best moment of inclusivity. But I was also the patient, or at least my daughter was. And there were things being assumed about me. One might think, like, oh, honest mistake, easy mistake. But what that mistake actually said to me was, I don't see you for your full self. I assume everyone believes what I believe. What else is this person assuming about me? So those were my boom, 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 my three, in one in 24 hours and then three in 18 months of ways in which it really felt overwhelming to be myself in this place. And now we're 15 years down the line. Christian nationalism and the alt-right have found a home in Lancaster County, and it has only gotten more difficult. And thankfully, my kids have gotten older and we can have these conversations. But it's a little window into what it's been like to raise our children here. I'll share a little bit about what it's like every December for me. I've already told you that when my kids were in the suburbs in public school, they were told they were going to hell at least once a year, always around Christmas. Really interesting. But you may be aware, and some of you may be bivocational. I don't know. Some of you may own businesses. Walking around Lancaster and doing business in December is super overwhelming as a Jew. I don't hate Christmas. I am literally the first person you want to invite over to bake Christmas cookies. I want to be with you in your home. I want to share your traditions. But I want my secular and professional space, my public and professional spaces to be secular. I think that would do a lot of good. And I think it would prepare students, for example, growing up in Lancaster, for the larger world. So I try to avoid all doctor's appointments in December. I try not to go to the dentist. I don't have checkups. I try to do that for my kids. This year, I had a health scare in December. I couldn't avoid it. I was at a new doctor, a specialist, on December 1st. And I had a very lovely interaction with the nurse who was getting me settled in and checked out. I'm on a table. I'm not dressed, right? I mean, I'm covered, not dressed. And as she's leaving on December 1st, she said, "And I hope you have a Merry Christmas." And I said, "Oh, I don't celebrate Christmas. I'm Jewish." And she goes, "Oh, well, I didn't know that." And I said, "Right, you didn't know that." She was flustered. I was flustered. She left. The doctor came in. He was lovely. I'm fine. My health all checked out. But when I was checking out that day, that same day, that woman found me. And she put her arm around me and she nodded quietly. And to me, that went a long way. She didn't say anything. But to me, what I experienced was she acknowledged that even though she was upset by my pointing out what she had done, she had actually made a mistake. As I point these things out to people, I get a range of responses. And the ones that feel good are the ones that say, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about that. Thank you for pointing it out." The ones that feel bad are defensive, unpleasant, you name it. So that's a little bit about what it's like for us being in central Pennsylvania and raising Jewish kids. I also like to point out, I write a lot about sort of education in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we will share links with you for some articles I've written. But I often talk to teachers who are sending home Easter Bunny math worksheets or, the 12 Days of Christmas worksheets. A public school to me is a secular space. Sam, what amendment or what law decision? Sorry.
Engelby Vitale, 1962.
Yes. So I've learned it's not enshrined in the Constitution, but is enshrined in constitutional law, thanks to my husband. Public schools, in my opinion, should be a public space, a secular space. And I will often hear from friends who are liturgical Christians, "Oh, the Easter Bunny is secular." To which I respond, it may be secular, but it is still Christian hegemony when in a public space. And Christian hegemony leads to and supports, upholds Christian nationalism, and that is dangerous. So you want to keep sending home your Easter Bunny math sheets? Fine. But you can't then also say you care about an inclusive and welcoming space, because that is alienating. So, what can you do? Again, I'm assuming, the spiritual leader for the people in your congregation. So self-serving pitch, bring us to your congregation. Educate your congregants on what it means to really be a member of the community at large, not just a member of your church community, which I support, I applaud. I want you to have strong communities, but I also think a greater awareness of what else is out there helps both the people outside of the dominant culture and will help the people who grow up here when they leave. Becky put into the chat, Head Start doesn't celebrate any holidays for just this reason. I didn't know that, but that certainly makes sense. But then my question is, why is a public K-12 school any different? They're both government programs, right? So that's always been confusing to me. So I would say, again, if you're bivocational, if you have educators, if you have business owners, what does it mean if you're only decorating for one holiday? What does it mean if you're only talking about or celebrating one holiday? And what can you do to maybe be more inclusive? I'll be perfectly honest with you. I would prefer there were no holidays celebrated in schools, public schools. But if holidays have to be celebrated, I would like to see a variety of holidays. That's where I come down on it. I'm one person.
Try your best not to appropriate when you do.
Sure. So partner with people of that faith to actually have authentic experiences. So business owners, educators, pastors, chaplains, there's room for you to be the leading edge of being more inclusive. I would say have hard conversations that you don't have to have. At one of our talks in Mechanicsburg, a man shared with me that he lived in a retirement community that had started, I think, as a Christian retirement community, but was now secular. And when somebody passed away, the screen in the lobby still said I don't remember the phrase exactly, in Christian, with sympathy in Christian tradition or something. There might be a phrase, but the word Christian was in it. And he, a Christian himself, said to the person in the lobby, does it really make sense for the sign to still say that? Because we're not actually a Christian organization and we don't have only Christian members. And they changed the sign. And the man didn't have to do that. Christianity was his faith. He was a member of the congregation where we were speaking, but he had that conversation, even though he didn't have to. This is a great question. In the chat, do you get offended when we try to be inclusive but make mistakes? So, first of all, I am very hard to offend. So I want to start there. Do I get offended? I don't get offended. And maybe I didn't make this clear enough at the top. I think intentions are super important. So if someone is trying to be inclusive, I want to honor that. I think impact is more impactful than intentions. And so I would love to see more people try, and I would love to see you look for the resources so that when you're trying, you can do so in an authentic way. This is my plain way of saying, please don't have a Passover Seder in your church unless you're partnering with a local Jewish congregation and doing an interfaith Seder with their input. Curtis, I don't know if you want to come off mute and talk more about that. I hope I answered your question. But again, for me, it's not really about offense. It's about intentions and authenticity. So if you present yourself as an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that wants to be a better ally, I think trying is great. I think talking to somebody about how you're trying is better.
I think you helped me. Yeah. I realize that I try to do more research and try to find as much information as I possibly can, um, so that I can make it more authentic. We have a son, a biracial son, and I tried our family has tried from the very start of his birth to work with Kwanzaa and work with groups so that he can be a part of that and see what that's all about. And not only him, but that we learn and that we become more inclusive, because it was new to us in our heart and our life. And so we're trying to learn as we go. And that's much, I mean, that's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I will share with you a story, as I am wont to do, that speaks to this experience and a caution, which is when my daughter was in first grade, she had a lovely first grade teacher who got very excited to share the Passover story with the group. They were doing, a unit on cultural or heritage, and she sent me a link to an animated video she found about Passover, and she was very proud of herself. And as I was watching the animation and listening, I thought, these are not words I typically hear when talking about Passover. Like something's not ringing true for me. And I Googled the publisher of the video, and they were a Christian homeschooling association.
Mm.
So when you're doing research in a vacuum about something you don't know a lot about, you then have to do that extra step of where is this information coming from? And certainly, I work for an educational technology company by day. Certainly with AI, we're going to see that more and more, right? So I would encourage you, you know, do the research. I mean, I think research is fun, but I think most importantly is check the sources. And if you don't have a way to vet the sources yourself, find someone in the community who will work with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and when there was a question here, Joanne said, to the best of my knowledge, New Jersey observes all religious holidays, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim. I don't know a lot about New Jersey. I do know that Christian, Jewish, and Muslim would only cover part of the student body. So I'm not sure what their intentions are. We joke when we lived in New York City, the joke was every person in New York City knew every other holiday because it meant they didn't have to move their car for alternate side parking. So everyone had a list on their refrigerator from the New York City Department of Parking, and it listed every holiday and whose holiday it was. Certainly I don't think the New Jersey schools are celebrating every holiday that we're on the alternate side of parking, but it is great to try to be more inclusive. So the problem is, Becky says, the problem is if you celebrate all religious holidays, that would include many more religions than what you mentioned. As a school teacher, this is a tricky issue with Jewish coworkers. We give them a Hanukkah present when we are exchanging Christmas gifts with other staff. Do we give them a Hanukkah present when we are exchanging Christmas gifts with other staff? Some I've talked to were fine with that, while others do not want to exchange gifts. Communication is important. Yeah, I was agreeing that. Sorry, I'm reading and talking at this time. I would agree with that. I would say many of you probably know that Hanukkah is not a major holiday for religious or observant Jews. And so sometimes Jewish people don't want to be wrapped up in the sort of commercialization of Christmas. I'm sure some of you don't want to be wrapped up in the commercialization of Christmas, but we certainly don't want Hanukkah brought into that mix. I would say, and this is something that this is a real sticking point for me. You can't have a work holiday party and still do everything Christmas, right? It's not about taking the word Christmas out. It is about being inclusive. So maybe you do a party on December 1st and it's a winter party and everyone exchanges winter gifts, right? Instead of Secret Santa, it's Secret Snow Person. There are lots of ways to get around that, but I will say you're right. Ask the person. I just got a message from my husband to tell one of our favorite stories, which I didn't. It fits right in. So thank you, Sam. We worked at a private secular school for a while. So not Christian, not non-denominational, secular. And it was a holiday party being thrown by the board of trustees for the faculty and staff. So the president of the board gets up on the stage. There was a stage in the room where the party was, and said, we're going to play some games. We're going to start with the 12 days of Christmas, and everyone pick a prop and get in a line, and you'll each sing a verse. And she tapped, thankfully, not a Jewish employee, but another Jewish board member, but a board member who was Jewish. And the woman responded, I don't know the 12 days of Christmas. And she said, of course you do, the song, the 12 days of Christmas. And the woman said, I am not from here and I am not Christian. Why would I know the 12 days of Christmas? So again, from a liturgical Christianity perspective, the song, the 12 days of Christmas, is likely considered secular. I'm guessing, I might be wrong. But from a non-Christian perspective, it is Christian. Oh, the cat's yelling at me. Sorry. It is Christian hegemony, which makes the assumption and foists the assumption on the group that Christian things are normal, that everyone should know them, and that anything else is out of the ordinary. Yeah. Sorry. Cat was really mad at me. Okay. Yes, there was the year Hanukkah was on Thanksgiving. That is so true. Hanukkah is not always in December. I think, is it this year that we're going to have Hanukkah twice, and once in January and once in December? Or there's some years like that. That's coming, right? So, yeah, Hanukkah moves around. I'm assuming you all know that's because Jewish holidays follow the lunar calendar, not the solar calendar. So they don't actually move around. They move around on the secular calendar. They don't move around on the Jewish calendar. I think we're at the end of sort of my talk. Do other people have questions? Do you want to come off mute? Do you want to challenge us on anything we said? Please do. Or do you want to invite us to your congregation? Please do that as well. I mean, y'all, if nobody talks, I'm going to call on people I know, and I don't think they want me to do that. So, anyone learn anything new? Devin, if I call on you, will you come off mute?
Why I knew you were coming my way. I just knew it. I learned a whole lot. I was saying to my friend, I'm gonna have to invite you to our church because this is information, our people are destroyed because of a lack of knowledge. And this is information that we need because we think we're being inclusive when we're being offensive. And
Yeah,
so,
and again, it's not, I want to be really careful. Devin, you know me, I'm very hard to offend.
yeah,
But it
yes.
is, if your intention is to be inclusive, then your actions should follow suit, right? And so we just want to be able to get that out there to as many people, and we can walk to your church. So yes, please. Um,
But thank you for the information.
yeah,
And thank you for sharing on tonight. And,
yeah,
I enjoyed it.
good to hear your voice.
Yeah.
Sherry asked, are you exhausted trying to educate the public? That is a very kind and interesting question. Sam and I love doing this. We are both former actors. Sam is currently still a teacher. He gets to get up in front of students all the time. I am an extrovert who sits in my office, my lovely, lovely office, and talks to people online all day. I love doing this talk in person. We typically have so much fun. I will say that Monday night, having two Christian nationalists in the room was incredibly stressful, and I am still exhausted from that. Yeah. Um, Jane has her hand up, but first, David Harris asked to define Hanukkah. Sam, do you want to? That's not a me question. That's a you question.
Sure, I'll try to do it quickly. So Hanukkah is the 8-day holiday which commemorates the supposed it's mythological uh, emergence of a resistance movement to the Hellenists, who were the imperial rulers in Judea in the late 2nd century BCE. You may know them as the Hasmoneans, or more colloquially as the Maccabees. And what the story says, even though the story isn't true, is that the Maccabees conquered the Assyrian Greeks and retook the temple and reconsecrated it because the Hellenists had turned it into a gymnasium for all of their nefarious, decadent doings, including things involving pigs, which is really, really bad if you're a Jew. And the miracle of Hanukkah and why it's 8 days, so the story goes, is that the candelabra there outside the temple had 8 branches, and it was lit all the time. And it was lit with the special oil. And of course, you could only light it with a special oil, but they couldn't find any of the special oil because the Greeks had done horrible things with all of the accoutrement in the temple. And so they found enough oil for one night, but miraculously, it lasted for 8. That's the story they tell us kids. That's not really true, any of it. The quick and dirty really is that, yes, there was an occupation of Judea at the time by the Assyrian Greeks. And yes, there was a gap or a discontinuation of the regular rulership at the time. The Jewish high priest, who was actually a collaborator with the Greeks. So that's more history there. I won't get into the details of that unless you want me to later. Send you a long email with this information. Was actually against the Hasmoneans. So there is this give and take of who they actually were. What actually happened was there is a harvest festival of Sukkot, or booths, which in one sense is a commemoration of the Israelites' trek through Egypt and how they had to erect temporary dwellings. And it also comes to the harvest time around October, late September, October. During the occupation of Judea at the time, this holiday could not be properly celebrated because the temple could not be a receiving place for the regular sacrifices that were brought from around the country. You would bring, there's 3 pilgrimage holidays: Shavuot, Pesach and Sukkot. The Sukkot holiday could not be celebrated at the proper time because of this occupation. And so really what Hanukkah actually is historically is just that holiday of Sukkot postponed 2 months into the later part of the year, which often falls in the early winter or late fall. It's a holiday which has taken on similar sort of commercialistic and materialistic notions as Christmas had, in large part to kind of like keep abreast of sort of the assimilation for Jews in larger secular and Christian societies. But it is a holiday which has its historical roots in ancient Israel, but it does not follow the same kind of observance rules as the earlier holidays, which are like Sabbaths, many of them, because it's not considered a pilgrimage holiday, because it's one that was postponed later, and we have those holidays again every year. So it continues to exist, but in a kind of like a different sort of more quietist realm.
Sam, thank you for all of that. Jane has her hand up, and we only have 2 minutes left. So Jane, I'd like to give you the last question.
Okay, well, it was a historical question about the time frame for the beginning of the synagogue, because in the Gospels, Jesus is supposed to have begun his ministry at a synagogue service. And someone asked me one time when the synagogue started, and I wasn't sure what to say, but I thought it might have been during the exile when the temple wasn't available for worship. But I thought I heard you say, Sam, that it was like the 3rd or 4th century. So I just wanted to clarify from a historical point of view, could you clarify that? Because I'm wondering where it came from in the Bible then.
So synagogue is a Greek word. It's like an amalgam of two things, house of gathering. And it relates specifically today to what I think would have been called or still called, but would have been called in Ashkenazi or Jewish Europe, the shul, which was a kind of all-encompassing place where there was school and prayer services. So what the synagogue becomes is that. What it was in the 1st century was not that. It was not a house of gathering where you would have had what you have today, which is a regimented prayer service, which involves rituals and ceremonies related to the actual scrolls of the Torah. You would not have seen that in 1st century Judea, 1st century Galilee. They didn't have that kind of regimented, there wasn't that kind of structure within pre-exilic life. Post-temple destruction and post-exile, you then get a more established, more structured version of that, which does take place in domiciles and later on in dedicated structures that become known as the synagogue. But as the synagogue, as we have them now, those as we know them now did not exist in 1st century Judea. Did people gather to pray? Yes, they did. Was it structured and regimented and normative? No, it wasn't. So that's what I meant when I said that synagogues as we know them now didn't really exist until the 4th or 5th century. Does that help?
So well, yeah, because then what's in the Gospels is more like that was a predecessor of what the synagogue is today, actually.
Yeah, and so I don't have Greek, unfortunately. I would be interested to see what the term is in the actual Greek from the New Testament, from the Gospels that has been translated as synagogue, and how that word, that etymology developed over the centuries. I'm interested. You've given me a research point to go and investigate. Thank you.
So thank you all for being here, for staying with us till the end. Paul, is there a way to send this slide presentation out to everyone who came so that they can see these links? We have Sam's writing, I've done a lot of writing, and then if nothing else, you can take down my website, which has a contact form and my email address on it. We'd love to.
If you send me a PDF, I'll
Great.
send it out by email to everyone.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Oh, someone said I'm from the Mechanicsburg Church you visited recently. You got extremely good comments. I endorse these guys to come to your church. Sherry, were you actually at our presentation? Because that was really special because my mom was in the audience. It was one of our favorite presentations. There was a lot of back and forth in that one. My mom even learned some stuff. It was great.
I can imagine the kind of comments and outspoken folks we have who are not afraid to ask and learn. And really, everybody, if you have time and interest, a big endorsement from St. Paul's Mechanicsburg.
Thank you. Strangely, my mom was visiting from Florida and started talking to the woman next to her, and my mom went to high school with that woman's husband in Pittsburgh. It was a
I
very,
think I heard that story.
it was a very,
And
it
Steve
was
and
a,
I were sitting here trying to guess who the gentleman was who asked for the display to be changed in the nursing home, and we think we got that nailed.
okay. Well, you can ask Pastor Alyssa. She was there. She knows. He was lovely. He was lovely. Yes. So please, invite us to your congregations. We'll go anywhere and well, I mean, anywhere we can. And we are just so grateful that you signed up for this and that you came. And I hope you have a lovely night.